Howdy folks, today I'm going to show you how to change the tubes in your Fractal. Wait, what? Everybody, welcome back to my Fractal tips and tricks videos, and if you're new here then it's really great to have you join us today. So one of the many things I have learned over the years by building and modifying tube amplifiers is that tubes do make a difference. Not everybody believes that, but trust me, they do. And I have an extensive collection of old and new preamp tubes from delicious 1950s Mullards all the way up to stock standard brand new JJ tubes, and they all sound a little different. Spoiler alert, the Mullards are some of my absolute favorites and they sound astonishingly good, much better than the new tubes in my very humble opinion. Plus, it blows my mind that 70-year-old tubes still work so well. Man, that's crazy. Anyways, think about it like this. Pepsi don't be tasting like no Coca-Cola, right? They are the same drink but have slightly different flavors. Now you get me, right? Good. Glad we're on the same page. One of the main draws for me to the Fractal FM9 Turbo and the Fractal universe in general over all the other modelers was the fact that you can change the virtual tubes in both the preamp and the power amp section of the amp models, and it goes much further in allowing you to change the hardness of the tubes, adjust the bias, etc, etc. You can go really deep into it. In my experience, changing tubes is extremely powerful, as what it does is changes the baseline of the amp's tone and harmonic contents. And this is something that I find you cannot replicate simply by EQing, because tubes are really complex little machines and don't just affect one frequency, but numerous frequencies and harmonics across the sound spectrum. Tubes also fundamentally change the way an amp feels to play, and in the FractalVerse, you can go into realms that are not easily possible with real tube amps, as I'll be showing you in just a second. And what this all really allows you to do is tailor your amp models inside the Fractal to sound and feel exactly how you want them to sound and feel, and like your own personal and perfect amps. Today, I'm going to change the preamp tubes and the power amp tubes in a Marshall Plexi 100 watt and adjust the bias to create my ideal fire-breathing hot-rodded Plexi. So let's dive into FM9 Edit and I'll show you how to do this and how changing the tubes makes a difference. Alrighty, we're here in FM9 Edit and I've dialed up a pretty cool preset with the Marshall 1959 SPL Super Lead Plexi. Check it out, this is how the stock amp sounds. Pretty fantastic right off the bat, and basically when you look at the amp, everything is basically on 10. That's the way I roll, and that's the way you should roll with a Plexi, right? Just turn everything up and it sounds glorious. But I wanted to hot rod the amp, so I came up with this one. Check out this amp. Has a little bit more gain, it's tighter and it sounds a little bit different. The tone profile has changed ever so slightly. I love that. I have two different flavors of Plexi basically. So when we look at FM9 Edit, I have a very simple chain here. I have a drive pedal which is switched off right now. I actually use that for the lead tones, and you'll hear that at the end of the video when you hear the full track. So I just kick that on for some more boost and saturation. The amp, like I mentioned, is a 1959 SPL on the treble channel. That's a Super Lead Plexi. For the cab sounds, I used the Dynacabs again. I have a preset for this. I love the sound of this one. It has a dynamic mic on one side and a ribbon mic on the other. Sounds glorious. And then I have a delay, which is just the dual delay on the stock settings, a reverb, which is the large hall, and then the output there. In order to show you a comparison of the sounds, I'm going to turn the delay off on both of the scenes that I have here for both of these different amps. So in the stock setting, it's basically a Marshall Plexi, like I said. So when we go into the tone settings on the ideal, you'll see that everything is basically just dimed. Yep, that's what you got to do with a Plexi. The master as well. Now this is really important. Now on stock Plexi, you don't have a master volume. It just doesn't exist on a real Plexi. You just have a gain control, which is just called the volume. So basically by diming this, it's taking it out of the circuit. If we go over to the preamp tab, then you can see it's got the stock tubes in there, the ECC83. Now this is probably, I'm guessing here, an emulation of the Mullard ECC83 tube, which was the one which came stock in the Marshall amps back in the 60s and 70s, etc. Phenomenal tubes. I have lots of them. I buy them when I can find them at reasonable prices because they sound so incredibly good in amps. Love the tone of them. My custom built Plexi that I have, Mullard tube in there, yeah. It makes the tone. There's a specific one, it's a yellow label, and it just sounds absolutely glorious in there. And if you click the preamp tube type, you'll see that there is a variety of different tubes in there which you can select and play around with to see what sounds best for the tone that you're going for. It even has an EF86, which isn't found in a lot of amps, but it's so cool to have it in here. All right, if we go over to the power tube section, you'll see that the power tube type is the EL34 Mull, which is the EL34 Mullards. Yeah, they're the GOAT when it comes to Marshall Plexis. And you'll see that there's a whole raft of different tubes that you can select. Now, Marshall amps usually have EL34s in the power amp section, hence that's what we have here. And the bias grid by default is at 44.5%. Now what this does, as you turn it down, it turns it more into a class B amp. And as you turn it up, it turns it more into a class A amp. And that does affect how the amp sounds. We'll explore that in a second. And then we have the hardness, which is set at 5. Now this is the knee of how it distorts. And what this means is if there's a gentle knee, then it basically distorts in a nice, pleasant way. Otherwise, it kind of clips quite abruptly if it's too high. If that's your sound, you can actually dial it up. Alrighty, let's check out my hot-rodded amp now. So if we go over to the preamp section, you'll see that the tube that I've chosen is actually a 12AX7 Syl. Now that's the Sylvania 12AX7. Now the reason I picked that is because I'm a huge Eddie Van Halen fan, and Eddie used Sylvanias in his amps. In fact, I have some in some of my amps in this studio, and I know how they sound. They are fantastic sounding tubes. Now, what I'm going to do is actually go through these tubes and show you how it changes the tone of the amp. And it's just a subtle change, but it is a baseline change to the tone of the amp. So if I pick this first one, the 12AX7A, and play a little bit. Let's check out the JJ. That's a little bit harsher to my ears. There's a little bit more kind of to it. It's probably the hardness of the tube which is coming through. All right, let's check that. All right, let's check out the next one, which is an RCA. This one should be pretty cool because RCA tubes are fantastic. Fabulous. The mid-range is a little bit different on that one. Here's the Sylvania. This will be a little bit more spiky. I love the tone of that. Alrighty, next one, the 12AX7B. Next up we have the 7025. Now 7025s are basically just 12AX7s, but they are ultra low noise versions of the 12AX7, so they're premium tubes. They sound absolutely fantastic. Let's check out the tones. I like the sound of that one. All right, back to the ECC83. This is probably a Mullard. I can already tell the differences there. There's a little bit more bass extension on that one. The mid-range is a little bit different. There's a little bit less high-end on that one as well. All right, let's check out the ECC 803S. This is probably a JJ tube. Oh, I like the sound of that one. That sounds very similar to the Sylvania. A little bit different in the low end, but very nice tube. All right, let's check out the EF86. I bet you haven't put one of these in your tube amp, right? Fabulous. That one sounds different as well. All right, I'm going to go back to the Sylvania, which is my favorite one. I just like the way it sounds. The mid-range is correct. The treble is coming through the way I like it, and it's rolling off a little bit of bass, so it sounds a little bit tighter. That's exactly what I was looking for. That's why I wanted to hot rod this amp. So that's the perfect tube for me. One of the other tubes might be the perfect tube for you, so do play around with this. All right, preamp tube done. Now this is where the magic happens. Check this out. I'm going to go over to the power tube section. What? There's a 6L6 GC in here. Yep, I actually changed the power section completely. Now, the stock standard Marshalls have an EL34 in the power section, but you can put whichever tube you want in the power section with the Fractal, because the ability is there to do it. If you wanted, you could use 6 AQ5 tubes. You can use 6 CA7 tubes. In fact, I use 6 CA7 tubes in my actual Plexi, my 50-watt custom build. I love the sound of them. They sound a little bit different from the EL34s. Or you can just pick the 6L6s. I actually settled on the 6L6 GC, the Sylvania version. Sounded good to my ears. There's a Tungsol version and a GE version as well, 300B, 5881. Fun fact for you, did you know that the first ever Marshall amps built were actually made with 5881 tubes? They were changed over to KT66s shortly thereafter, but the original ones actually had 5881 tubes in it. So Marshall does have a history with these tubes. In fact, my PRS HDRX head, which is back there somewhere, which is essentially a copy of a Marshall Plexi, actually has 5881 tubes in it. And that amp, it sounds incredibly good. Then you have the 6505s, another little piece of Marshall history for you here. So from 1972 onwards, Marshall amps which were exported from the UK to the USA actually had 6550 tubes in it, because the US dealers were saying that the EL34s which they were originally shipped with were breaking down way too much within the warranty period. Yeah, you even have a 6973. I don't even know what that tube is. Then we have our complement of EL34s, EL84s, KT66s, if you want some real low end and some punch, a KT77, a KT88 as well. Lots of tubes to choose from, and you can go through these and check out which ones you like the sound of. Let's audition some of these. I have no idea what a 6AQ5 tube is or what it sounds like, so I'm going to check it out. Why not? Sounds pretty good to me. All right, let's check out the 6CA7. Nice. All right. Then we're going to go over to the 6L6. Yep. A Marshall with a 6L6 power section. Now I can already tell the difference now in how the 6L6 power section is sounding, because the tubes actually have a different tonal characteristic from the EL34s and the 6CA7s. So there's a little bit more tightness there. There's a little bit more high end, a little bit more high mids that I can hear. I hope that's coming through on the video as well. By the way, if you're digging this video, then make sure that you smash that subscribe button and hit the bell notification as well, because I'm going to be bringing you more of these tips and tricks videos really, really soon. Thanks so much. All right, let's get back to these tubes. So I settled on the Sylvania version of the 6L6 tube because I just like the sound of it. It sounds tight, it's rolling off that low end, it's actually controlling that low end really, really nicely. The mids are coming through just beautifully. But let's experiment with some of the other tubes. I have never played a 300B tube. Let's check it out. Wow, that's a profound difference. I did not expect that. There's a little bit less volume, but also it's a little bit grittier sounding. It's got some grind to it. A little bit less gain as well. All right, let's check out the 5881s. Wow, great tube. Works well in the Marshall. Like I said, they were in the US versions of the Marshalls. Let's check out the 6550s. These are great tubes anyways. Cool. There's a little bit looser bass in that one. All right, next tube. Let's see, the 6973. What's a 6973? I have no idea, but I'm gonna try it out because I can. This is the great thing about the FractalVerse. We can check all of this stuff out. How cool is that? I like that tube. It sounds really, really nice. It's kind of like the 6L6, but with a little bit less high end on it. Very, very cool tube. And then we have our EL34s, which we know how they sound because played it on the first one. I'll just pick this Mullard version here. Sounds big, sounds beefy. I like that. And there are different versions of the Mullards as well. So the Svetlana version is going to sound a little bit different again. So if we go over to the Mullard again. The Svetlana. So subtle differences in both of those tubes. Then we have EL84s, which are lower powered tubes. Let's go for the Mullard. Let's see how this sounds. I really like the sound of that. That would basically make this probably like a 25 watt amp or something like that. Maybe 30 watts. But what a great sounding tube. All right, KT66. Wonderful, wonderful. It's a little bit fizzy sounding for my ears, but really great sounding tube. All right, KT77. Brilliant. All right, and the KT88, right at the end of the list. I like that one. That's got quite a lot of punch, that one. All right, I'm going to go over to the 6L6 GT Svetlana. I just like the sound of that, that's why. All right, there's a couple things that I did to this one. You'll see that the bias grid here is at 80%. So basically I dialed this up. Now if I put this back to about 46% like the other amp, you'll see how this changes the tone. All right, so let's check this out. Do you hear how there's a little bit less gain? And also the bass is a little bit looser. So when I turn this up to about 80% now, it's going to tighten up that bass and it's going to give it a little bit more overdrive. That's what I want. That's what I want in my hot-rodded Marshall. The other thing that I did was I changed the hardness of the tube. So you'll see that it's at about 8 now. So if I put it back on 5, where it was as stock, it's about there. It's a little bit softer in its response. It's a little bit more pillowy. It's really nice, but I want it to have a little bit more yeah, so I'm going to dial it up. I'm going to put it on 8 again. So again, that's changing the low end, it's changing the high end, it's clipping a little bit harsher, but that's working for the sound that I was going for. There you go. That's how you start playing around with the tubes in the FM3, the FM9 and the FXIII as well. It does make a difference. Now once I have my bass line, whatever effects I put on top of it, it's going to affect the whole amp from that bass line. So it's going to affect it differently to if it had different tubes in it. This is why I love tubes so much. Look, I have loads on my desk. I literally have stuff on my desk. Preamp tubes and power amp tubes. They're always there, always to remind me that, hey, you know what? These things do make a difference. And you know, the same tube doesn't necessarily sound great in every single amplifier. Really great example of this is the Mullard ECC83. Sounds incredible in my custom Plexi, but in my custom SL030, just doesn't like them. It sounds bloated, very loose, just doesn't work in them. Whereas the SL030, it loves Chinese tubes. It just comes alive with that. Then I go over to another high gain amp, which is my PRS MT15. It loves the Mazda tubes. Mazda tubes were built by Mullard in the Blackburn factory in the UK. So they're essentially Mullard tubes, but they sound a little bit different from your regular Mullard tubes. So experiment with these within the FractalVerse, because you can create your own personalized version of your perfect amp. There you go, guys and girls. I bet you did not expect to hear me playing a Marshall Plexi with a 6L6 power section, right? And how cool does it sound though? I love how the tube change, both in the preamp and the power amp, changes the character of the amp just a little bit without making it sound like a completely different amplifier. And all of this is really, really easy inside the FractalVerse, right? Think about it. You don't have to take your amp apart, risk electrocution, risk messing up your precious 1968 Marshall Plexi, which is worth a small fortune, or take it to a tech who is going to have it for 3 or 4 weeks and then charge you X $100 for the work, right? I would love to know what your favorite aspect of changing the tubes in the Fractal was on this video. So leave a comment and let's start talking tubes. If you enjoyed the tones of this Marshall Plexi, then you can download the preset for absolutely free. You can also download one of my Splawn Quick Rod presets completely free as well. And if you want more tones, then I have a full signature preset pack available as well, containing 9 presets, all with scenes. That's around 70 plus tones right there. All the links are in the video description box below. Alrighty folks, if you enjoyed this one, you know the drill. Subscribe, like, comment and share with your Fractal loving buddies too. Time for the track. If you tuned in to my video last week, you already know how inspired I was by the tones and the sounds of this amazing Fractal FM9 Turbo to create this track. But I bet you didn't know at the time that it was a Marshall Plexi model loaded with 6L6 tubes, did you? Yeah. Enjoy the track and see you next time. Be good and have an absolutely awesome day.